I'm always going to start with this when talking about masteries. The most important thing when you're setting up a mastery tree is to look at the very bottom of the page down here at the 9 keystones. This is always, 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 always the first decision you will ever make if you're not sure what masteries to go for. Hit the reset button and say, well, do I want Warlord's Bloodlust? Which really only matters on Marksman. Um, Specifically bot lane marksman. There's probably some melee fighters that care as well, but it's, you've got to want lifesteal basically. Do you want lifesteal on your basic attacks? Then you make that choice. Fervor of Battle got changed for the 2017 season. Now it gives raw attack damage. It only stacks by actually landing auto attacks, and it gives attack damage instead of on hit damage. I've actually found, and to be fair, I haven't done the math to know in which cases it's better and in which cases it's worse, but essentially, Fervor of Battle feels better to use on a lot of champions. Now, what's interesting is this will actually make you want to bring Fervor less on Marksman, because Marksman cared a whole lot about their simple on-hit damage. If you were a Hurricane user, well, you're only going to get like 1/4 to 1/2 benefit from the attack damage of Fervor of Battle, but you would have gotten full value from the old on-hit Fervor of Battle. Um, if you're Jhin, you're not auto-attacking enough, so you're not going to get stacks. That's an obvious one. But maybe if you're playing Twitch or something and you care about expunge damage, then you do. But what I really like this for is champions like Olaf, where, and you might not want to get the rest of the ferocity tree, so maybe you don't go for that, but Olaf cares about his auto attacks, but he also cares about his attack damage ratio on Q and his attack damage ratio on E. And it turns out that getting a ton of attack damage is really useful on a champion like that. And so suddenly you've opened up a lot of casters who, look, might still go Thunderlord's Decree, but you've still got a pretty good chance of liking what Fervor of Battle does for you. The basic thought process that I would urge you to think about with this one is, do you want more damage out of your keystones? There's really only 3 keystones that grant more damage in a very direct sense, and it's Fervor of Battle, it's Deathfire Touch, it's Thunderlord's Decree, and then you could make the case that it's also Grasp of the Undying. But Grasp of the Undying is for tanks. So if you're a damage dealer, you're really saying, look, am I auto-attacking a lot? And then also using spells, probably. And I'm kind of fighting for a long battle. Am I primarily spell-based, which is Deathfire Touch, and that's AD and AP? Or do I really just care about bursting you at the very start and not having a lot of follow-up, which is Thunderlord's Decree? So, for example, if you're Lee Sin and your goal is to be more of an assassin Lee Sin, like you're doing Ravenous Hydra and maybe you're doing Duskblade or something, well, you're going to want Thunderlord's Decree because you're doing damage really fast. And if you're playing Talon, you probably want Thunderlord's Decree. But hey, if you're playing, Bruiser Olaf, I think Fervor of Battle is much, much better than Thunderlord's, despite the fact that you're just picking a keystone that adds damage, because you want to think about the duration of the fight. Of course, Deathfire Touch has not changed really in any way. Almost all mages prefer to go Thunderlord's Decree, but Deathfire Touch is very, very good, specifically on poke champions who are not going to get several hits in. Deathfire Touch actually doesn't want you to hit them many times in a row. So, for example, if you're playing Brand, especially in a support position, and you're just kind of landing a Q or a W or an E once in a while, you're getting a lot out of Deathfire Touch by compared to someone like Zyra, who's going to get several hits off at the same time because plants are very good. I also think this is a very good mastery, specifically on Victor, which I know sounds a little weird because Victor kind of wants to burst you, and to be fair, Thunderlord's Decree is still very good on Victor, but the reason I like Deathfire Touch on Victor specifically is because he has a lot of ability power, and the primary scaling on Deathfire Touch is its ability power ratio. It's 25%, it's pretty good. Thunderlord's Decree is 10%, and yes, it scales with champion level and everything like that, but at a certain point you get more out of it. So I mean, it's to taste, to be completely fair, but Deathfire Touch really matters on spellcasters who cast few spells. Jhin is a primary example. Varus is a good example. I think Jace is pretty good with this as well. Not necessarily always the right choice, but that's the kind of champion. Storm Raider Surge is also unchanged, but basically it's interesting because this mastery, this keystone, has gotten more popular over time. It used to be fairly ignored last year. It got several buffs. You can see it has slow resists on it now, which is very good. Basically, doing 30% of a champion's max health in 2.5 seconds is very hard to know going in if you're going to do it. Well, the answer is, if your champion does damage, you're going to do it, right? So if you're playing Rengar, it's easy. If you're playing Singed, okay, maybe not. If you're playing Akali, it's easy. If you're playing Olaf and you're not only fighting a Malphite, this is going to trigger. Storm Raider Surge is actually reasonably easy to get. Doing 1/3 of someone's health is not hard on almost any mage. Heck, just landing an Empowered Shock Blast will probably trigger Storm Raider Surge if you're not hitting a tank. Generally speaking, this is easy to get. So the question is, you're basically deciding, if you're going Cunning, for example, do I want Storm Raider Surge or Thunderlord's Decree? Because if I'm the kind of champion who can trigger Thunderlord's Decree and wants to trigger Thunderlord's Decree, I'm doing a lot of damage in a small amount of time, probably, right? Otherwise, if I was doing damage in a slower amount of time, I'd probably just go for River of Battle because that would scale better for me. But if I'm the kind of guy who's already going to use Thunderlord's Decree because I'm playing, Assassin Lee Sin, or I'm playing, we'll just keep using Victor as our example, even though Victor is good on Deathfire Touch, Victor's also good on Thunderlord's Decree. If you're the kind of guy who likes Thunderlord's Decree because Victor's trying to one-shot somebody, well, guess what? Victor would also kind of like Storm Raider Surge. And there are cases where you would just simply go for this Keystone because this is a lot of mobility, right? This is for 3 seconds. It's better than Ghost, and I'm incredibly resistant to slows, which means like there's specific examples that are kind of weird here. So for example, if you know you're going to be kited by slows, if you're trying to kill a Kog'Maw, if you're not Olaf, if you're Nocturne and you know they're going to try to get you off of them, keep in mind, if you're playing Nocturne, though yes, you would like Thunderlord's Decree because lo and behold, burst damage matters if you're playing Nocturne, when you jump in with ultimate auto Q, you're going to trigger Storm Raider Surge. And if they kick you off with like a Vayne Condemn or an Alistair Headbutt that you weren't able to spell shield, you're going to be back in range. And I think Storm Raider Surge is slightly underutilized, but I'm mostly trying to explain the reasons why you would use it, and I want to sort of make sure you understand that it's actually pretty easy to trigger this condition if you are a damage dealer. Again, this is not going to happen if you're playing support Alistair. This is not going to happen if you're playing Maokai in a lot of cases. Also, you don't really care about this if you're playing Maokai in a lot of cases. But if you're playing Tank Olaf in the jungle, you're still going to get this off. Thunderlord's Decree, look, if you're a damage dealer, you can't screw up by going Thunderlords. Like, there are going to be more optimal choices in a lot of places, but you are never objectively bad by taking Thunderlords. There are subjectively better ones, absolutely. I wouldn't bring this on almost any marksman in the game. The only ones I would really consider are Corki and Ezreal, and even then, it's debatable. This is almost definitely happening on Corki, for example, but you probably shouldn't bring it on tanks. There's better options. You probably shouldn't bring it on, slow methodical fighters. Like Darius shouldn't want this. Singed shouldn't want this. Fiora shouldn't want this. But look, hitting something 3 times, which is autos or spells, and by the way, you can do like 1 auto, 2 spells, that's fine. It's easy to trigger. The benefit is obvious. If you're just like, if you don't want to mess with Masteries, just go Thunderlords. It's fine. It's not terrible ever. It's fine. And and for plenty of champions, it is optimal, right? Very common Keystone. It's good. Look, that's all there really is to say. It's good. Here's one that I find interesting as well. So Windspeaker's Blessing also hasn't been updated in quite a while. Basically, your shields and heals are 10% stronger, and that is whether they're affecting you or affecting someone else or affecting minions. However, your shields and heals on other allies, not including yourself, increase armor and magic resist. Okay, so you cannot give yourself more armor and MR by playing Sona, but you will shield and heal yourself more by playing Sona. In my opinion, if you are playing a support who can make use of this Keystone in any reasonable way, well, I should take that back. That's not entirely accurate. I would say, generally speaking, If you're a support who can make use of this keystone pretty easily, this is probably the right keystone for you. Um, so my key example is someone like Nami, where it feels kind of bad to use Windspeaker's Blessing because you're only healing some, right? You're landing bubbles, you're doing damage, doing a bunch of other weird stuff, and it feels bad to only have one ability work sometimes with Windspeakers. But in my opinion, it's much, much better than going Thunderlords and someone like Nami. If you're playing Sona, I think it's debatable. Sona can be a lane bully, and she cares about Thunderlord's Decree. I think if you're playing Morgana specifically, you probably want Thunderlord's Decree because you want to get the free damage out of the puddle. Because Tormented Soil will trigger Thunderlord's Decree very easily on that champion. But generally speaking, Windspeaker's Blessing is quite good. And if your champion makes reasonably good use of it, it's actually a pretty safe bet to get. Now this does not mean that tanks who heal should get this, like Alistar in 2017 doesn't want Windspeaker's Blessing. Now that this Keystone's out in the game forever now, Alistar is not going to want this. They're going to want something else. But if this was 2016 or 2015-ish, then Windspeakers was arguably optimal on someone like Alistar. But basically, this is actually quite good on support. I would not get it anywhere else, even though it does increase healing that you do, including to yourself on a champion like Vladimir. There are simply better options that you should go for instead, in my opinion. So this is really support only and supports who heal and shield teammates. For example, I think this is the better choice on Karma. Right? Karma and Nami, to some extent Morgana, Sona, very obviously Janna. But there's several debatable champions who do some damage and shield. And I would generally err on the side of doing Windspeaker's Blessing for a lot of them. Karma and Nami being the prime examples of ones where it's very debatable, and I would urge you to go Windspeakers because I think it's actually better. But there is a tight debate between that and Thunderlords for champions like this, and you're not objectively wrong either way. I think Windspeaker's slightly better. So on to the Resolve tree, and again, your goal is to look at Keystones first and let that dictate what you want to do. I think that is very clearly always the right choice. Yeah, this is pretty good on, this can be good on Taric because you're going to get lots of heals and whatnot, but there's other Keystones that Taric cares about. Okay, so Grasp of the Undying. Grasp has gone through a lot of changes over the last year, trying to balance it properly. I think it's now in a very good spot where it's now in the state where it makes sense what champions are getting it. So Grasp of the Undying, every 4 seconds in combat, your next attack against an enemy champion deals damage based on your max health and then heals you for half that amount. Okay. Now, one of the things to keep in mind, I am 99% certain this is true. The heal that you receive is not affected by your opponent's resistances. So if you do 3% of your max health to a 700 magic resist Nautilus, you will still heal for 1.5% of your max health. Even though it says, and to be fair, it does say that in the tooltip, even though it's healing you for, what looks like half the damage dealt, it is healing you for 1.5% of your max health, which happens to be half the damage dealt. So keep in mind that the heal can simply be what you care about more than the damage at a certain point, and that's fine. Basically, Grasp of the Undying is for melee champions who fight other melee champions in lane. Pretty much that's what it comes down to. Now, what was interesting is throughout much of 2016 in the top lane, you'd have a lot of champion matchups like Poppy and Echo, and there's a third tank that I'm forgetting. I think it's Trundle, and there's a fourth that I'm also forgetting now. Poppy, Echo, Trundle, and there's another tank top. And what was interesting is a lot of the time people were going Grasp of the Undying, and sometimes they were doing Fervor of Battle. Now, what's interesting is a lot of the time when it was, and I'm going back on myself, but bear with me, when it was melee versus melee, like if you were playing Poppy, and you were playing Poppy's a bad example, I should take that back. If you were playing Echo, and you were playing Echo into Poppy, you would often go Fervor of Battle because you would land a lot of auto attacks. Attack speed was a pretty good scaler, and you would be fighting a lot, and you'd sit there landing a lot of auto attacks, working your opponents down. But if you were playing Echo and you were facing like a Jace or a Kennen or something, you would not have the time in lane to sit there and auto attack a Jace. If you're sitting there auto attacking a Jace, you've already won. Like, you've won that fight. You don't need a Keystone to help you. But if you're playing Echo into Jace, tank Echo into Jace, or you're playing Poppy into Jace, and to be fair, Poppy got this anyway, but you're playing these kinds of things. Shen's a good example, in fact, and the chat brought that up. You're only getting hits once in a while. And even though you'd love to sit there and wail on somebody, you're not going to get a chance to do that, right? You've got to be able to think, hey, if I'm playing a game of League of Legends and I see what you've picked in the matchup, you've got to be able to kind of model in your mind, how are these fights going to take place? And a lot of the time, if you're playing Tank Echo or you're playing Poppy or you're playing Trundle, Trundle was a good example of someone who would like to use Fervor if they could. If you're playing Trundle against Jace or something, you're not getting a lot of auto attacks off. You're better off just letting Grasp of the Undying turn on, getting that hit, and then getting out. It's nice sustain. It helps you survive melee versus range matchups, and in general, look at it as a really good burst of damage. Now, in general, this is a very good keystone if you're just simply playing as a tank. If you're playing as a tank top, you need some kind of keystone that's useful. The nice thing is, you don't need attack speed. You don't need much. You just need to land an auto attack at some point. And if you're playing Maokai, or you're playing Trundle, or you're playing Poppy, or one of those guys, you'll get an auto off at some point. And it's very good if you're in the laning phase. Now keep in mind, this is only effective against champions, so doesn't help you clear the jungle, nothing like that. It's not going to do a lot for you. Now this is the big one. This is the spicy keystone that many people have been talking about in the 2017 season, which is Courage of the Colossus. Gain a shield for 10 plus 10 times your level, so 10 to 190. And 7% of your max health times the number of nearby enemy champions. So the 190, to my knowledge, this is not a guarantee, but I'm pretty certain, the 20 to 190, because you start at level 1, the 20 to 190 shield does not scale based on enemy champions, but the 7% of your max health based on enemy champions does. This is very good. Now keep in mind, the things to think about here, you do not need to land crowd control on all the enemy champions. You only need to land on one, and as long as the other champions are nearby, you will get the bigger shield. So if you land a single target Nautilus ultimate, you will get a shield if it's in the middle of a big team fight. If everybody but one person dodges your Malphite ultimate, you will still get a very large shield. You do not need to land a 5-man combo to get a 5-man shield. This is very good for obvious reasons. And I mentioned that Alistair normally would have liked Windspeaker's Blessing. Well, it turns out Courage of the Colossus is much better. Shocking that. This basically lets you hard engage and then gives you 4 seconds to deal with everyone else's damage back at you. Now, it's worth noting, this is actually, it's not bad, but it's not that amazing. I want to say that amazing in a one-on-one lane scenario. Like, let's say you're playing Maokai, right? You have to land a hard CC to get the shield. And then, keep in mind, you got the shield by hard CCing your opponent, which means they're stunned or something and aren't fighting back until after the stun ends, at which point they say, oh, you've got a shield. And to be fair, they may choose not to fight you anymore, but if they choose not to fight you, well, your crowd control's down. They can choose not to fight you. There's a lot of interactions in this that make the one-on-one case not amazing. Also, keep in mind, in a 2-on-2 lane, if you focus the support, you're probably wrong. Right? If Alistair burns his combo trying to stun a Nami, well, Nami's AD carry is unstunned and gets to do free damage. And keep in mind, that AD carry should not be going for the Alistair anyway, because Alistair is very tanky even without this keystone. The teammate of the Nami should be going for Alistair's AD carry. And so Alistair's shielding himself when he's not the target. And of course, if Alistair is going to combo the enemy AD carry, well, they won that fight anyway, and they still don't need to go after the Alistair. It's still wrong to go for the tank. So I want to reiterate that in standard laning scenarios, this keystone is actually, look, it's useful, but it's actually not ridiculous. It is, though, very good if you are tower diving. It is very good if you are in a team fight, because look, if you're the Malphite in the front line and no one wants to hit you, oh boy, right? Keep in mind, like Hecarim's E, Hecarim's R, Zax's E, Zax's R, right? These are abilities where you're gonna dive way into the team fight, and you're gonna put yourself at risk to start the battle. And these champions don't have huge damage reduction tools like someone like an Alistar would have. This is very good for those champions. Vi would love even more shielding. Skarner would like more shielding. That's great. Someone in chat pointed out it's very good in ARAM. I agree. You're around a whole bunch of enemy champions all the time. This Keystone is very good in team fights. As one other point I want to bring out, dear Alistar players, do not use your ultimate with this shield still on. In almost all scenarios. Here's why. I'm going to talk about the mechanics of how a shield works. If you have a 500 point shield and you have a bunch of damage reduction, of course the shield takes longer to break. Of course, no surprise there. But a shield breaks either on taking all its damage or on timing out. Now the thing is, and trust me, this is accurate. If you pop a shield during damage reduction and the shield times out before it blocks all the damage, you've actually wasted most of the shield. Here's why. Think of a shield as a heal, as though it heals you for whatever the amount is on the tooltip, heals you up to that amount, but you might not get it all, right? So at the end of the fight, you have lost X amount of health and then healed for however much you got shielded for, right? However much health the shield prevented you from losing is what the shield healed you for, in a sense, right? And if you were going to take a total of 300 damage during an Alistar ultimate and the shield blocked 500, well, the shield only blocked 300. And okay, well, you took 0 damage during your ultimate. That's nice. Then your ultimate times out. You've got no shield. And even though you're at full health, you can now run through your entire health bar. And the 2,000 health you have left can be depleted. If instead you ult and take 300 damage during your ultimate, and you're at 1,700, and then you pop this shield as though you could do this at whim, and this was a 700 point shield, as we said before, now you've got like 2,400 HP that they can try to plow through. Now, of course, the shield comes in first. So instead, what you'd prefer to do, in an ideal world where damage is all done in an equal sort of timing frame at all times, is you would let it just chunk down your shield, and when the shield hits 0, then you'd pop your ultimate. In actuality, what you're really trying to do is simply pop your Alistar ultimate when the damage is going to come in. If you are going to be focused, if there's a Zed that ulted you for some reason, if you're suddenly targeted by the Kayle, if a Malzahar ulted you, things like that, then that's the more pressing concern, is just using the damage reduction appropriately. But I just want you to kind of understand, on a conceptual level, you will waste shielding by using it during large damage reduction effects. Just understand that when that's happening. That stacking a bunch of shields together means a lot of them are going to time out. Like if you're playing Skarner, you're probably going to hit W, get a shield, and gain move speed while using your ultimate. One of these shields is probably not going to get its full value, and that can be okay, but I just want you to be aware of that. As one other point that I think is very worth pointing out, for champions who have shields that they care about, for example, Skarner's shield gives him movement speed, and Nautilus's shield gives him a damage over time effect on his auto attacks. The way shields are coded in League of Legends, and this was implemented in maybe 2011 or so unless this changed, it should still be true. Shields take damage in the order they would time out. So if you use Nautilus's W, which is a 10-second long shield, and 3 seconds later trigger Courage of the Colossus, Nautilus W has 7 seconds left, and Courage of the Colossus has 4 seconds left. The Colossus shield will be taking all of the damage until it breaks. leaving the Nautilus W up for longer. It doesn't matter when you turn them on, whether you trigger this or Nautilus W first, that's irrelevant. What matters is what's going to time out. And it's, of course, that's coded in a way that's very beneficial to you, the player. But if, for example, even though you might want Nautilus W's shield more than the Courage of the Colossus shield, because Nautilus W shield has a benefit, if you wait 7 seconds after you get the Nautilus shield and then trigger Courage, the Nautilus shield will take damage first and break earlier. Just keep that in mind. This may at some point come into, it might matter at some point for you playing the game. And finally, we have Bond of Stone. Bond of Stone is another keystone that has not changed in any way in the 2017 season. You have damage reduction, and you absorb damage taken from your nearest allied champion. Now, keep in mind, this is the single nearest allied champion. It can swap very easily. If you're playing Janna in the back line and Ashe isn't taking any damage, you're not absorbing hits from the Fiora in the front. So you have to kind of understand that when you take Bond of Stone, you need to be a champion that's going to be near the people taking damage. Now, that might be that, you're trying to peel for Ashe, and Ashe is getting hit by assassins, and you're trying to absorb damage. That can be relevant, and there might even be a world where Bond of Stone Nami is the correct choice because 6% damage reduction is nice to have for your teammate. Probably not, but you never know. I mean, to be fair, like a 2,000 health marksman, this is worth 120 HP, right? A marksman getting killed from full to dead, this is 120 health, which, hey, 120 health that you're granting to your teammate. To match that with Windspeaker's Blessing, you'd have had to heal them for, 1,200. But, that's before armor and magic resist, and that's hard to debate at a certain point. And, hey, giving someone 20 armor is somewhere around like a 10% damage reduction, so, okay, you're starting to see where Windspeaker just kind of immediately trumps Bond of Stone. Now, with that in mind, then realize that this is 6% damage reduction, but if you're level, let's say, 15 or something, and you're giving someone 15-ish armor, 15 armor is better than that. 15 armor is much better than that. I am pretty certain that the Windspeaker's Blessing stat buff is based on the higher of either your or your target's level. So if you're a level 6 Nami and you roam up to the level 9 Gangplank and you give him a heal, he'll get the bonus armor and magic resist as though it was a level 9 Windspeaker's Blessing. Minor point, but worth knowing. It's basically level plus 4 is the amount of armor, and you get half that in magic resist. Just so that you know. The Bond of Stone is, at this point, a fairly hard to use keystone. It's hard to want it because basically everyone who was using Bond of Stone was probably already a support tank. No one else is running this keystone. And most support tanks can use Courage of the Colossus. Leona is a great example of someone who would definitely like Courage of the Colossus, Wants to get in the front line, wants to survive it all. Great. Will no longer go for Bond of Stone. You're going to be hard-pressed to find someone who wants to use his keystone. I'm having a blank. I'm kind of drawing a blank right now. The examples of someone who might use this, for example, maybe like a support Trundle. When you could argue support Tahm Kench might not even care about this because it won't trigger that frequently. You're not getting that many stuns in team fights as Tahm Kench, and you might just want Bond of Stone instead. It's arguable. But the one other thing I wanted to bring up now that I bring up tank supports. The other place you use Grasp of the Undying frequently is in tank versus tank support matchups. Now, I don't have a lot of research into 2017 bot lanes and how top-level players are playing this, but when Trundle versus Tahm Kench versus Alistar versus Taric versus Braum was very common, Grasp of the Undying was the most sort of frequently used keystone in those battles because once again it's a melee tank fighting a melee tank, and what do melee tanks do to each other? Hit each other with large health pools. And even though Bond of Stone is nice to have and it gives you damage reduction and that's nice, Grasp of the Undying allowed you to win fights because even if you were going for the other support, well, you'd win the trade. If you're going for the AD carry, you got a nice chunk of damage that actually mattered. And again, someone like support Trundle, if they're in one of these situations where they actually will get into the face of the enemy support, not if you're playing against Zyra, don't do it, but if you're playing a Taric or a Tahm Kench or an Alistar, Grasp of the Undying. But otherwise, Courage of the Colossus, of course, quite a bit better. Okay. So that's a long spiel about Keystones, but again, the Keystone is the single most important thing you can do when trying to pick up Masteries, so you should really, really try to pick that first and then go from there.